Thank you very much. Welcome everybody, and welcome to my panelists on this, what hopefully is quite an informal discussion. So thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us online as well for today. What I'm really pleased to do at a technical stage is to see all the technical conversations going on, like to actually see code being generated up on screen like that. I think that's what you are all looking for, to see examples, to see tips and techniques about actually using Bitcoin SV. And so that's what I'm excited to be sharing with you. And I have a panelist of some guests here today who'll be talking a little bit about the Technical Standards Committee. Now, Technical Standards Committee is something that some people know a little bit about, and I hope to share with you today a little bit more about what are the goals and objectives of the TSC, as we have an acronym for everything, the TSC, and to explain a little bit about that today. But first I'd like to just introduce the guests and actually ask them to introduce themselves and give a little bit of their own personal background, and then we'll have a little discussion about what are they looking for and what do they think the TSC has value to each of you. So maybe I'll start with Latif on my left here. Could you maybe introduce yourself and just give a bit of background?
Thank you for the invite. This is really a very crucial step in getting, in this case, BSV and IPv6 to move together. Because somehow, by coincidence or not, they have been designed to work with each other as, by chance. It's like, a guy and a girl met at the age of 20 and they fell in love without knowing it. And then all of a sudden they grow together and had the big family and so on. So I see it in those simple terms. Okay?
Thank you, Latif. And we will ask later a little bit of your experiences and that. So.
Forward to your easy questions.
Oh, yeah. Well, there might be. Bryan, if I can ask you for your own background and how did you make your journey here?
Yeah, sure. I've spent about 20 years in digital transformation consultation, where I've worked with businesses and governments of different sizes and really consulting on just various technologies. At one point, I was actually consulting with over 1,000 different technologies. And as you can imagine, that's sometimes a burden. I really found one of the biggest problems that I was facing with almost all of my customers at the time was just cybersecurity issues. And that's one of the things that really led me to blockchain and to solving some of those core problems with just a heavy reliance on trusted third parties. And it's really what brought me into blockchain, and specifically BSV, in the sense of how it could scale to actually solve these issues. And from that, I've really invested the time and effort, just like anybody here or watching today, to learn more and consume as much as I could, and then start applying that learning into various aspects. So I've become a certified cryptocurrency investigator, a certified Bitcoin investigator. I'm a subject matter expert for the Department of Defense through a civilian organization, where I provide a lot of the subject matter expert insight on blockchain utility. And I've spent the better of almost a year now, well over a year, educating policymakers in over 34 different countries on the utility of blockchain.
Thank you, Bryan. Appreciate that. And I think we'll hear a little bit more later about some of your experiences dealing with regulators. It's not something we all have to deal with every day, but I think we'll get some guidance there. Michaela, could you perhaps give us a little bit of your personal background, your journey, and how you got here, and what's your position at the moment?
Yeah, so my background is from a slightly more technical perspective. I started out in academia. I completed a PhD in mathematics and physics, and then from there I joined nChain, came into the blockchain space as a researcher. And so I'm coming from a slightly more technical perspective. I'm currently a research director, and that means I'm responsible for the delivery and the strategy of the IP portfolio at nChain from the research department perspective.
Thank you, Michaela. Appreciate that. And my own sort of background is a blend of technical and business. I've seen both sides of the coin. Currently co-founder and CEO of Centbee and one of our services, Minute Money, as well. We are implementers and have been in this space for a while, and we're also very happy to be using standards. And this TSC actually grew out of its origin story, was a wallet workshop a couple of years back, where Steve Shadders gathered together some people across the BSV, at the time I think it was the BCH community, and was actually saying, guys, how do we actually get the technical people to be able to talk to each other so that we can get interoperability, so we can have transactions that don't just run at the blockchain, but we can actually get extra features built into above that, for miners, for wallets, for developers building new features. So that was the origin story of the TSC. That workshop was so good and the engagement was so good amongst the people. I said, we need to have a formalist mechanism that we can actually talk amongst each other. And from that grew the idea of, well, standards are a good way for us to all talk. Instead of us all being together in a workshop, which is great and useful, but a standard is something that anybody outside of the closed club can download and see. But you have to ask, so what is the product of the TSC? And I look at it as being the standards are the tangible product, the written standard that you see published on the website, etc. The process is important. We'll talk a bit about the process we use as well and how we use a process to get a good product. The consumer of the product is developers like yourself and business people like yourself who can also see that standards are out there. But you have to sort of also draw back as, do you really need standards? What are standards for? I mean, is there really a need for standards? And maybe Latif, you'd be a good person to jump in with your experience and standards. And do we need standards and why are they useful?
That's $1 million question. So basically, you have two ways that you can do in parallel. So you create a standard by default or a real standard. So it's quite interesting that BSV as such has been designed with IPv6 in mind. So by de facto, it is 50% standardized. But I need to see it in all papers that IPv6 is included. Then people will not be surprised that this thing has nothing to do basically with the internet. Or it is perceived as one of the competing things. It's very important also to start working on some publications within the standardization organization. You have to close your ears. So nChain has some very good researchers and some very good engineers that came up with excellent papers. So one of the first thing we should do is publish what is called an informational RFC on BSV and IPv6 and how BSV uses IPv6, and then publish it at the ITF, which is the house that designs all the protocols for the internet, in which the IPv6 has been designed back from 94 until 98. On the basis, we have started the IPv6 Forum as the only endorsed forum. Normally the ITF hates, commercial stuff and so on. So since IPv6 was one of the biggest protocol ever invented, to move from a research protocol like IPv4 into a commercial or production, real production thing. So that's fundamental to really publish always in all papers that you are doing that this is based on IPv6. So they all take it for granted this is already half standardized, which will send a very strong message to the entire government and so on and so forth. Standardization now. There are a certain number of organizations. You have the international ones, then you have the national standardization bodies, and then you have the regulators, the government, and the industry associations, and so on and so forth. In terms of international organization, you can start with ISO. They have a blockchain technical group called TC, Technical Community 307, in which you can publish, in this case, I will have to ask maybe the researchers from nChain to write this informational paper, and you use that in order to publish the same thing in the other ones. Next one will be the ITU. They have a blockchain probably in Series 15. In Etsy, there are two groups. We had our group in there. So I don't know why Jack Davis, who was part of the panel, he didn't join. He has already a written paper on this one, which we can use to publish it. Also within ETSI, there is a DLT, which is distributed ledger technology, but they never mention IPv6 into it. So they're already obsolete by de facto. So that it can be published there as well. Then you go to basically W3C. This is where we have to be careful. Within W3C, you have what is called blockchain IoT integration, so BII. And there you should only talk about IPv6 and blockchain BSV, but not talk about Web3. Okay, so Web3 basically is not endorsed by Tim Berners-Lee. He's a neighbor, he's a professor at the University of Southampton. So he comes here a couple of times a month to teach, because he sees that the Web Foundation is kind of usurping his own thing. So, but it has to be standardized. And normally we have to convince Tim Berners-Lee to look into Web3 thing and says, yeah, I think we can fix it by adding or subtracting whatever. Because we should be careful with these terminologies, because Web 2 is not really standard. So it was just a marketing effort that Tim O'Reilly has used it to do conferences as soon as Facebook and so on came up. So you had a kind of active web instead of just text from Web 1. But in the meantime, he designed the semantic web, which is called Web 3.0. So it's a bit confusing to have Web 3 and then Web 3.0, which is on his website. And in the meantime, we have also the Web of Things, which is designed by Dave Raggett from the University of Bristol. And he is basically his proper assistant of TBL. No? So then we have to go to the national standardizations as well, with the same paper. Like NIST, they have also their own blockchain definition, which is a bit different. They look at it more from how to protect, how to change privacy data and so on, so it's not really immutable as such. So it's looking probably at the healthcare sector. So it will be, by vertical. So in some places you need immutability, in some areas you should not, debug that. And then you go to the, to the Chinese, like CICT. And then obviously with the same paper, you can go after the regulators, to explain to them this, as we have heard from the other places. There is a lot of educational effort to be done there. And then in the industry association, because utility is basically the verticals, food supply chain and logistics and so on and so forth. And you have to brand that you are basically the real. And that kind of effort, it takes you about 5 years to get this done.
About 5 years, this sounds like quite a significant process.
Yeah, beauty is that you have the TSC, as you said. So it is very good to have a group like this one to go after these channels. Sorry to be too long for my colleagues.
I think it's important that we understand that standards are important, your experience in there, and that we're all building on foundations. We're all building on the different foundations that previous people have built before us, and that enables us to actually do our work. We've got all these building blocks. What is your experience of talking about the standardization process to regulators? Do regulators expect standards? How does that actually advance our conversations and our industry at that space, Bryan?
Yeah, let me start with the later part of that question as far as do we need them, right? And I would say absolutely. It allows us to streamline and unify technological development. So it's the communication basis, as you mentioned, to be able to allow all of these different technologies to be built upon together. And, as far as government regulators go, I think that they've still got quite a bit of work on their plate as far as, they have lots of different things on their agenda. And, unfortunately, within, say, the blockchain cryptocurrency space, they're more primarily focused on, the car fire that's going on at FTX, rather than, say, more of the positive things that, say, blockchain could provide. So there's a huge, as you mentioned, education aspect that goes along with this. But, I think the standards, when they get to that point, are key for these regulatory bodies to perform their tasks. One of the detriments of creating, say, various pieces of legislation without fully understanding, say, the value proposition of these technologies is that you might be defining things wrong. And typically, and this may not be true for all countries, but typically, a lot of the definitions, once one is set, it never changes. And it's just brought on from bill to bill to bill. And so I think, that is, the basis foundation for anything that's successfully passed legislatively is to define, what those technology, what that definition is for that particular technology. And I see it's, vitally important. I think the work that the TSC has done to date has been so ahead of its time that when it does reach to that pinnacle of, the conflation of these terms, crypto and blockchain, and they start to see, again, the utility that this can provide, that they're able to go back and say, are these the correct definitions of, say, decentralization or, what a UTXO set is? Now they're going to be able to build upon the work that has been done to create that communication across all of these various technologies. Because again, a blockchain really empowers, not just the data integrity, but it empowers all of these other technologies from drones, IoT, sensors. There's no shortage of smart devices that we have in our lives. And if we can maintain that communication across that technology stack and be able to allow others to build upon the work that we're doing and others are doing, now you're going to be able to do that in a more efficient way where more global adoption can happen.
I'd like to compliment on this one quickly. Matter of fact, you're not the only one promoting your thing. Everyone is doing that. Some people are even paying millions of dollars to governments, like Sam, what he was doing and so on. So you have to do exactly the same thing, if not 10 times more than the other guys, to create this standard by default at the beginning until it's standardized, because you might have a lot of enemies, to come against you as well in the standardization. So yeah, what you're saying is quite important.
I wanted to just make a comment out of that. We're still in the early days of the TSC and the standards that are out, and we are maybe a little bit ahead of ourselves in some ways, but we are creating standards, the first versions of those standards. They are not set in stone. The protocol is set in stone, and the BA is there to safeguard the protocols. The standards committee is there to suggest standards and to give you first versions of standards that have been through a good, fair process. Working groups where technical experts, who are probably more technical than us here at Stage, have actually gone and debated and argued the different pros and cons of the different implementations. And they've got to a 1.0 version. And it's your opportunity now to take those, implement them, and say enhancements, refinements, etc., to get to the 1.1 and the 1.2, which is a useful product, which then actually proves its usefulness in the competitive market of you and all the people around us actually using those products. So this is an opportunity. I'm calling for you to look at those standards, use them, adopt them, make suggestions, and then they will firm up. We'll fix those issues in the standards. I mean, no standard is ever 1.0 is live. It's always a little bit of a version on that. So I'm calling on you to have a look at it and use that opportunity, because we are creating those standards now. And there is a competitive market around us. We're all competing for attention, we're all competing for capital. So the sooner we do it, the more we pay attention to it, the more we can build, the more we can work on it. So I appreciate your perspective on that. Michaela, I want to think, as a mathematician, a cryptographer who's built on the work of thousands of incredibly bright minds, what do you feel about the fact that we are building on other people's work? But should this be open? Should we have patents? Should we be protecting this? Most sort of mathematicians write papers out in the open and publish them. What's your thoughts around the process we use and why we use a process like this?
Yeah, the way I see it is that, patents help to protect inventors. They help to protect other people from using their ideas, inventors' ideas freely. So I don't think that patents don't mean that it's not open. It means that inventors are protected, and it also means that the classic phrase is it fosters innovation. I was reading something the other day which I found really insightful that was describing how patents can actually, generally they might be perceived to make monopolies worse, but they can actually help with monopolies. You might consider maybe a big player that has a large part of a market, then some small player comes along and has an idea that they've protected. And that gives them an advantage and helps to, make the system better for everyone, I think. And so I think there are a lot of ways that patents do provide benets. And I don't think that it means that they're not open.
I missed that point because it wasn't my side. It slipped my mind because we're in a bruised ecosystem. And people are using, all kind of tricks, to kill each other. It's an absolute war, from the crypto side and so on. Their conferences are, 10 times bigger than this one. And they spread a lot of lies because the guys, they want to make money. Okay? So we have to create, in this case, patents, to protect this community, which is investing in this stuff which is a bit long term. There is no immediate, money coming out of BSV. So it's more of the normal industry deployment that has to be done, and the patents are very important to protect this community from being, forked or hijacked and so on and so forth.
And I would add that.
Go ahead. I just wanted to mention from a patent perspective, what we do is we have a process inside the TSC that protects the participants who are in a working group talking about it, and then also protects the users of the standard, that they're not going to be attacked for something that they use, a paper or a library that they use. They're not going to have to pay royalties afterwards to somebody. So that is part of our processes to try and provide tools and systems and value to you as developers that you can take through. However, what about the risk of a cabal? About us actually sort of like now locking it down, that no one else can use it, etc. Is there a risk of a cabal forming that no one is allowed into the environment? Or does this process of creating standards actually create innovation? Maybe your thoughts?
Oh yes, no. The prime use for standards is to scale so that the entire world can use it. It's not standardized, then you will have only a niche approach to the market. When you standardize, anyone can use it because everyone can hook to you with their own solutions and so forth. They'll be able to, use your technology. And this is the purpose of, matter of fact, the purpose of this conference is to scale the use of this protocol. And when you protect it, you protect them at the same time. But then you invite also the other guys because you have standardized it. So they will be able to create their own application around it differently, but they will be able to interconnect with the other guys. That's the internet itself. This is the way it functions. So interoperability, this is where the word internet comes from, interoperability, nothing else. So even the French have not realized, now you have to change it because everything has to be French. This is the only word that is still English in the French language.
Internet.
L'internet, which is tongue-broken word for the French. Which shows that, as a matter of fact, the wife of Bob Kahn, who is the prime inventor of the internet, she has basically patented the word internet. That was one of the reasons why it has remained for the entire planet. It was back in '86 or something like that.
So this approach actually is the Antique Cabal. It's the approach to make sure that there is not centralized control.
I mean, look only at the electricity plugs. They are not standardized worldwide. The British have 3, the French have 2, the Germans have 3, but the box is different. So I travel quite a bit. So my case is full of different things. This is just for the older technology of a long time ago. And we're still using different plugs. It just shows that somebody has thought to lock out others. That was the prime reason why these things are totally different.
What do you think regulators' perspective on this approach is?
Again, I would argue that, well, not so much argue, but I would relate that a lot of them are still trying to get a handle on this. I think the EU more than anybody has really been able to create a European sandbox where now they're inviting these various groups in to better understand these technologies and potentially create almost standards for their own European Union. And again, as long as we're able to communicate beyond these small bubbles or cabals, right? Especially if they have more nefarious actions of causing disruption or just stealing IP and creating, a competitive environment where they really don't belong because they can't continue to move the innovation along if you're just stealing other people's ideas. So as far as the regulators, I think once we're able to, provide substantive value of standards and definitions and roadmaps and bringing these different collective voices in, I think when the regulatory bodies start to, really hone down on these, whether it's stomping out maybe some of the nefarious cryptocurrency actions that are occurring or empowering more blockchain utility. Just to give you an example, in New York City, they spend almost $18 million in 3 years on, hey, we want your crypto project, or we want, your blockchain project come in, let's set it up, let's do this. And after 3 years, they had nothing, right? There was nothing that was able to scale, able to actually make an impact beyond even a borough, a city, God forbid, a state or a country. And when you can start to bring along and say, let's do this in a more strategic way by setting, say, metrics for transaction processing before you can, accept these type of monies to create these proof of concepts that may make an impact for, one small group or another, or a large group in our country, our city, our state. Let's make sure that we're investing in something that can make that overall beneficial impact. And, that's a lot of the work that I've been doing in the background as well with my public policy work, is to help them formulate more strategic ideas on, one, opening the communication up, but also prioritizing, what is something that's substantially or technologically innovative enough that will make an impact today, tomorrow, and the next day.
Thank you, Bryan. I appreciate that. And we're wrapping up now. I'm very aware that we are standing between the people in the audience and lunch. That's getting hungry. So I think just a closing thought perhaps on maybe, Michaela, if you can just even give us some comments. And I'm very pleased to see new members of the TSC, such as Bryan, and there's quite a few other new members that have joined the TSC to give us technical depth, business depth, policy expertise, and a little bit of gentle behind-the-scene guidance from Latif. Michaela, perhaps you could comment about the BRCs, the Bitcoin requests for comments, that how do we as the TSC interact with them? Maybe a thought?
Yeah, so BRCs is a community-led project that has been, they've created a kind of a gap between, filled a gap between the TSC and kind of no technical standards at all. And so they're kind of trying to introduce this way to start kind of a pre-standard by making it slightly easier to kind of get on the ladder of providing some sort of standard that then maybe the best ideas will go into something like the TSC. I think we're lucky enough at this stage that with the TSC we're still at a stage where we're quite small, we're able to be flexible and take feedback from the community, and we're very happy to do that. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to see what comes through from the BRC into the TSC.
That's good. I think a very public vote of support for the BRC process and to get that input to ideas. Closing thought, Bryan, perhaps?
I'm thankful and honored to be a part of the TSC, as, I really feel having that insight and information of the work that you guys are doing allows me to do my job better, right? To inform policymakers and regulators and legislators how best to approach this technology. So it's really, as I mentioned, it's ahead of its time in the sense of where this technology is at globally as far as understanding. And it's just, going to serve us in the long run and excel our adoption.
Thank you. And then closing comment?
Yeah, so in 5 years' time, BSV IPv6 should be a widely accepted protocol thanks to your work that you have to do. With the small step that I have given to you. It's really fundamental to go after this one in a very aggressive way. So use the research team to write this informational paper, which you can use as a base, because they have written it many times. So, fully fledged, how can you use IPv6 with blockchain, or BSV specifically, and then run with this one. And you will win the battle. This is how it is done. Okay?
I like it. Action plans.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating today, and appreciate if there's any comments or questions for the TSC, please lead that in through our various channels, through Discord, email, or the website, etc. So thank you for your time today. Hand over.